Everybody says Freddie Freeman's the one that got away, but I think not re-signing Dansby Swanson ended up hurting the Braves more. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today, your source for news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby, award-winning baseball writer and podcaster. You can follow me on social media at Crosby Baseball, and you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. We're proudly part of the Believe Podcast Network and presented to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com to get started. There's a very common thing that gets brought up now every time the Dodgers go out and sign a bunch of top free agents. And it's that Freddie Freeman should never have left the Braves. That he wanted to stay, he practically begged Atlanta to sign him, and he didn't want to leave. And fundamentally, that's just not true. We'll get to it in a few minutes, but Freddie had every opportunity to either negotiate in good faith, give Atlanta a counteroffer, or even give them the opportunity to match the deal he got from LA, and he never did that. He ultimately chose to leave and go to LA. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But I think that in retrospect, not signing Dansby Swanson ended up being the worst decision. It ended up hurting the Braves from a quantifiable on-the-field perspective more than maybe we realized it would at the time. So let's talk about both of these decisions. The decision to re-sign Freeman or not and how they pivoted to Matt Olson. The decision to not re-sign Dansby Swanson. And where Atlanta went from there and kind of game out the scenarios in both situations had Atlanta made one deal or the other. And on the Freeman thing, we can go ahead. I'm ready to stop talking about this, and national media keeps bringing it up every time the Dodgers sign somebody and people say the Dodgers are ruining baseball. Freddie Freeman chose to leave and go to Los Angeles. Okay? The quote from Stephanie Abstein of Sports Illustrated back in October, late October, was, quote, Freddie Freeman all but begged to stay in Atlanta. And that's just not true. When you look at the timing and the logistics of the negotiations, Atlanta did everything. And then they never had a chance to actually match what Los Angeles did. Atlanta offered Freddie in March of 2021, 5 years and $110 million as a starting point in negotiations. August 1st of 2021, they offered 5 for $125. They upped it by $15 million. August 4th, they came back and offered 5 for $135. They upped it by another $10 million. Then the lockout happens. When Atlanta comes out of the lockout, they offer Freddie 5 for $140. It's important to point out, we talk about the Atlanta max of $22 million. 5 for $110 was the Atlanta max. Atlanta went all the way to $28 million a year in their offer for Freddie Freeman, 5 for $140. Freeman's camp and his agent, Casey Close, from what's been reported by ESPN, counter the 5 for $140 offer with one of two options. 5 for $165, which is $33 million a year, or 6 years and $175 million. This is on March 12th. Okay, that's $29.2 million a year. And they give Atlanta 1 hour to make a decision. And this is the real mistake of the entire thing. Because Casey Close didn't understand the way that Alex Anthopoulos works. BB Abbott, the longtime agent for Chipper Jones, said this: you don't negotiate against Alex Anthopoulos. You work with him. Atlanta said, no, thank you. We're not going to do either one of those. And at that time, both sides agreed there was no offer on the table. And so Freeman, Atlanta pivots, they go trade for Matt Olson. Freeman signs 6 for 162 with LA 5 days later. Atlanta never had a chance to do 6 for 162. Remember, they were given 5 for 165 or 6 for 175. And when you factor in the deferrals, not even factoring in the state taxes being higher in California, just when you factor in the deferrals, the 6 for 162, which is about $27 million a year, comes out to a value of $148 million, $24.6 million. Atlanta was willing to beat that easily. Did Atlanta ever have the option to match that deal with Freeman getting more money from no deferrals and the state income tax being much better than in California? We have no reporting that they ever had a chance to meet that. So again, I hate that we spent the first 4 minutes of this podcast rehashing this, but Freddie Freeman chose to leave. If he wanted to be in Atlanta, he'd be in Atlanta. Chipper Jones warned him this exact thing would happen, and it did. But think about how things would be a little bit different had Freddie Freeman stayed. Okay? Look at your payroll going into the 2022 season. Okay? Matt Olson's making $15 million on the extension that he signed after the trade. And let's assume that Atlanta did the 6 for 162. That Atlanta had a chance to meet LA's thing. That's $27 million a year. Not knowing what the money structure would have been. Would it have been the same salary every year? Would it have escalated? If we assume it's the normal thing, you're looking at like $12 million more in payroll for Atlanta to pay that year. The good news is it really shouldn't have stopped them from doing anything. The only if you look at going into the 22 season, there was Charlie Morton. You know, he signed for $20 million after the 2021 season ended, and he broke his leg to win you a World Series, right? So there was that financial outlay. But Atlanta didn't actually spend a ton of money that winter, right? You had the deal for Eddie Rosario, right? 2 years, $18 million to come back. Like, you did spend some money, but it's entirely likely that Atlanta's able to absorb the difference between Olson and Freeman. Absorb the $12 million. So I don't really know that anything changes. Maybe Adam Duvall's the casualty. He was owed $9.275 million for the 2022 season in arbitration. Maybe that's where the money comes from. So take the 22 roster, add Freddie Freeman, and subtract Adam Duvall. Is that a better team? Is that a worse team? Matt Olson wasn't bad in 2022, but he wasn't the Matt Olson that we know him to be at. He hit 240, was a 120 OPS plus, 34 homers, and 44 doubles. And the problem here is Freeman's first year in LA ended up being really good. He hit 325 that first year in LA. I mean, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, right? He led all of baseball with 47 doubles. He only had 21 homers. People forget that his 31 homer season with Atlanta in 2021 was the highest home run total he's had after the age of 30. His home runs, he had that 31, he had 21, 29, then 22 and 24 the last two seasons while playing partial years, right? 147 games in the last 2 years. I don't think the 2022 Atlanta Braves look that different, right? I don't think that there's that much of a change from year to year. Duvall wasn't actually that good that year. He played 86 games. He hit 213. It was an 86 OPS plus, while making a ton of money. And then he left after that season, and he goes to Boston for 2023 and is actually pretty decent, and Atlanta tries to bring him back. He's pretty decent before he gets hurt. So you're probably a better roster in 22. But again, the gap from Freeman to Olson isn't as big as we think it is. Like, Freddie Freeman's been one of the better first basemen since he signed with LA. Matt Olson's been right up there with him. It's a different style of player, right? Olson hit 54 homers in 2023. Different style of player. But from a WAR perspective and all of that stuff, Matt Olson's been nearly as good as Freddie Freeman has. I think the much bigger difference, like the much bigger change here, is if Dansby Swanson re-signs after 2022. We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. NFL postseason, first weekend's already been absolutely bonkers. Looking at week 2, some of these matchups are going to be really intriguing. Bills at Broncos. Bills are favored by a 1.5 on the road. 49ers at Seahawks. Seahawks are favored by more than a touchdown at home against the 49ers, who are seemingly missing everybody. It's like Kittle got hurt towards Achilles, is out for the year now. And then Rams at Bears. That's going to be tons of fun. So if you want to get in on some of this action, or you just want to see some, like you want to pick the games, you want to pick the winner of the Super Bowl. The favorites right now are the Seahawks and the Rams to win the Super Bowl. Or you just want to get in on some of the MLB futures. I had somebody ask me the other day, can I bet on the Mets to Mets? You can bet on the under on the win totals for the Mets, or just bet on somebody else to win the National League East. Go to FanDuel.com or down the FanDuel app to get started. Okay, so we rehashed the whole dumb Freddie Freeman thing, hopefully for the last time. And again, if you're tired of hearing about that, I'm really sorry. I'm tired of us having to bring it up and defend Atlanta for Freddie Freeman deciding to go somewhere else. But let's talk about the Dansby Swanson thing, because this one's a little bit harder to see how it works from a financial perspective, because the offers were so different and the money was so different. But I think if you look at Atlanta from that point on, you can really see where having Dansby Swanson, one, fixes a lot of issues for the Braves, but then two, prevents them from making some moves that may have not been great moves, okay? So the whole thing with Dansby Swanson's negotiations here, right? He ends up getting 7 for $177 from the Chicago Cubs, which, like, let's be clear, is a lot of money. He's making $25 million a year for 7 years. Supposedly, reportedly, the counter offer that he, for Atlanta was like $140 million. And AA explicitly said this, because he was talking to, back when Jeff Schultz used to work at The Athletic, columnist. That they had 2 people, believe it or not, 2 people focused on Braves baseball. Now they have none. But the quote from AA about Dansby leaving, I love that he said this, that AA said this. Quote, "I will say this, Dansby made every effort to find a way to stay in Atlanta. We had conversations in the summer. He was willing to take a lot less than what he got." Kind of skipping over a little bit here. He deserves everything he got, but at a certain point, it doesn't make sense for us. Atlanta thought 7 years for Dansby Swanson didn't make a ton of sense. And, in retrospect, I think Dansby Swanson's aged a little better than we expected. But, you could see how this didn't necessarily make sense for the Braves to do this deal. Okay. In Atlanta, over 7 years, Dansby Swanson had an OPS plus of 95. The only time he had an OPS over 100 in a full season, so not counting his 38 games in 2016 and not counting the abbreviated 2020 season, the only time his OPS plus was over 100 was the final year he was here. It was a 114. So, it was in 2021, we won the World Series. He was a 99 OPS plus hitter. He was right at league average in 2021. Now, obviously, his defense and everything else weighs a lot in there. There's the leadership, all the intangibles. But from a purely baseball perspective, from an offensive perspective, the only time he was an above average hitter was his walk year, was his platform year. And Chicago paid him off of that platform year. Now, the good news is, in Chicago, 2 of his 3 years have been above average. A 104, he had a 98, and then a 105. One of the things going for Dansby, his arm strength isn't great, but he's continued to be a very, very good defender, right? Finally got the Gold Glove he's been trying to get. Back-to-back Gold Glove years. 22 in Atlanta, 23 in Chicago. Back-to-back Gold Glove years. Has continued to be a very good defender. Even last year, at the age of 31, 71st percentile, +2 fielding run value. His range was very good. His arm is not great. He'll probably eventually end up at second base, but his arm is weaker and continuing to weaken, as most players do. But his range continues to be fantastic. His sprint speed continues to be fantastic. I was reading something after the season from my friend Michael Cerami over at Bleacher Nation, writes about the Cubs. And they talked about Dansby Swanson's contract and how he's lived up to his contract from a sheer dollars per WAR perspective. He's absolutely lived up to the 7 for 177. Looking at, what he was projected to do versus what he actually did, the defense is aging better than they expected. He's either been right even with where he should be, or he's been positive on a WAR per dollar value kind of metric, right? But let's look at Atlanta and let's assume that 140 is what Dansby gets, right? Let's assume that 140 counteroffer, he's getting 20, we'll round it up and we'll say he's getting $24 million. If you're paying Dansby Swanson $24 million for 2023, you re-sign him to that deal. This is not the Cubs 177 over 7, where it's $25 million, but you could even do that. There's some things that Atlanta has to do differently to make that money work. And it may end up being in your favor if you do that. Okay? Think about the deals you signed going into 2023 and the moves you made going into 2023, right? You bring back Charlie Morton. He's making $20 million. I'd like to think you still make that move, right? He's still doing that. That makes a lot of sense, right? But if you remember, Atlanta wasn't super active that winter on signings, with the exception of they made a trade for Sean Murphy, right? December 12th, they do a 3-way trade and they get Sean Murphy. And then they sign Sean Murphy to a 6-year, $73 million deal. I don't think, if you look at Atlanta's payroll and Atlanta's finances, right? I don't know if Atlanta still makes the Sean Murphy deal if they have the Dansby Swanson money on the books. And the hard part of this is it's kind of a lose-lose for the Braves, right? Because, I guess, one for me, I'm a believer in Sean Murphy finally being healthy and being the guy we thought we were getting in 2023. We saw him in the first half of the year. He talked about he's had this hip injury for multiple seasons now. He had it in 23, he had it in 24, he had it in 25, and they finally caught it. And I'm a believer that he will be back to that first half of 23 form. When I did that show talking to the hip surgeon, he told me that it would make sense that the first half of the year, a guy would be playing better before the cumulative wear and tear on the hip started to be a problem again. I think Sean Murphy can come back. But in this scenario, you don't have Sean Murphy. What you do have is William Contreras. And this is where it gets complicated, okay? Because William Contreras has been a very good hitter. 2023, he was the 11th place finisher at MVP, the 124 OPS plus. And then 2024, he was a 5th place finisher in MVP with a 130 OPS plus. Back-to-back Silver Sluggers and 2 All-Stars. He had that DH, an All-Star at DH in 22 with Atlanta, and then 24 at catcher with Milwaukee. But the reason he was a DH in 2022 was because he wasn't a good defender. And William Contreras has talked about it needed, the trade is what made him realize he had to do more work on being a good defensive catcher. There were Braves pitchers who would not throw to William Contreras. It's never been confirmed who it is, but if you go back and you look in the 2022 season, I believe the only pitcher, the only starter on staff that does not throw a single game with William Contreras as their catcher is Max Fried. I don't know for a fact it's Max Fried, but you have to remember that that's the only thing that we can see. The only guy who didn't do it, who didn't throw to him, was Max Fried. And Contreras has talked about that trade is what made him realize he had to do more work at defense. And then obviously the Brewers have catcher devil magic. Every Brewers catcher ends up being a fantastic defender. They make every catching prospect that they have into an amazing defender. I don't know how they do it. Again, it's devil magic. So if you rerun the 23 season, no Sean Murphy, yes William Contreras, and then you have Dansby Swanson at shortstop. What does that look like? We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today, Lindsay Crosby. Having Dansby Swanson is really interesting. And then not having Sean Murphy and having William Contreras is, I think, a whole nother set of questions. The 2023 season, Atlanta's catchers were okay, right? As a group, they hit 236 with a 783 OPS and hit 32 home runs. Sean Murphy was very good in the first half. He was not in the second. Travis d'Arnaud hit 209 for the season with a 674 OPS. On the whole, he was not a very good hitter for the year. I believe it was Murphy was like a 107 OPS plus or something like that. Shortstop. Your shortstops hit 263 because it was almost entirely Orlando Arcia. And if you remember, he hit over 300 in the first half of the season. But since Dansby Swanson left, Atlanta's started 11 different players at shortstop. And for the most part, they've been bad. Here's the hard part. Vaughn Grissom hit 277 as your shortstop. He also had a 622 OPS. He had a lower slug than his on base. Nicky Lopez played 5 games at shortstop, and as a shortstop, went 7 for 19. But on the whole, these guys have not been good. And so I don't really think there's that much difference in 2023 if you have Dansby Swanson as your shortstop. It's 2024 and 2025 where you really see the boost of 1, having Dansby Swanson, and 2, having William Contreras. Because again, Atlanta's used 11 different players at shortstop. And I don't just mean like to finish out a game after a pinch hitter. I mean on the lineup card. It's been 11 different guys. And outside of that first half in 23 for Arcia, where he hits 294, it's a 111 OPS plus. Outside of that, none of them have been good. And then behind the plate, other than Drake Baldwin in 2025, you've had issues with injuries, right? Sean Murphy has been injured multiple times. And you've had some ineffectiveness, right? Whether it's Travis d'Arnaud in 23, and if you remember, he misses a month early in the year. And so having a guy in Contreras who in Milwaukee had a 2-year stretch, 23 and 24, where he started 228 games. And he played in 24, he played in all but 7 of Milwaukee's games because he was a DH 35 times. He DH'd 30-something times in both those seasons. And so 2024 is really the big one for me, where you can see if you have a Dansby Swanson, right? Braves shortstops in 2024 hit 215 as a group. They had a 70 OPS plus as a group. It was mostly Orlando Arcia. But in that same stretch, Luis Guillorme got a start. Luke Williams made a start at shortstop. Zach Short made multiple starts at shortstop. And none of those guys was very good. In 2025, if you have Dansby Swanson at shortstop, it looks a lot better than the group you had that was mostly Orlando Arcia and then Nick Allen, with a little bit of Ha-Seong Kim late, including the only 3 home runs that you had from your shortstops, all came in September, all thanks to Ha-Seong Kim. But Nick Allen wasn't good. Vidal Brujan wasn't good. Orlando Arcia wasn't good. Luke Williams wasn't good. Jonathan Ornelas played a little bit of shortstop for you and wasn't good. I think he made 1 start. And I think he only got 2 plate appearances and he came out. But the point is, having Dansby Swanson, you might be good enough in 24 with Dansby Swanson and with William Contreras offensively to get in the postseason before game 162. And that's the other thing here that I think that it's impossible to quantify. But the other thing that I want to talk about is what was the story about that 2023 season? How amazing they were on the field, and then how they just utterly collapsed in the postseason. They couldn't do anything. And one of the things that people pointed out, and we'll never have the truth on this because there's no way to quantify this, but one of the things people pointed out was you lost 2 of your biggest leaders. You lost Freddie Freeman after 2021. You lost Dansby Swanson after 2022. And you had a new group of leaders in that clubhouse in guys like Austin Riley, like Matt Olson, quieter leaders, lead by example, Travis d'Arnaud, guys like that. The intangibles of Dansby Swanson, the being there, the playing every game, all of that stuff, does that make a difference in the 2023 postseason? Do you get past Philly with Dansby Swanson? We'll never know. But losing your leaders is the other part of this that really hurts. And at the end of the day, from a financial perspective, it feels like Atlanta made the right move in not going past $22 million a year and not going 6 or 7 years for Dansby Swanson, right? He was 28 his final season in Atlanta. He'll be 35 his final season in Chicago. I find it very hard to believe that he's going to be the same caliber of player at age 35. It's the wrong side of the aging curve for a guy that already was dealing with, below average arm strength and all of that stuff. But in retrospect, Atlanta was not prepared to replace their shortstop from a purely baseball perspective, from a purely on-the-field performance perspective. They were not prepared to replace their shortstop. They thought they had it figured out on the cheap with Orlando Arcia. They did not. And the extra money that it would have cost you to make that deal and to sign Dansby Swanson means it's entirely possible you're not able to trade William Contreras to get Sean Murphy. And again, I'm a Sean Murphy believer. I think he's going to be fine this season. But from just looking at the money, you probably don't have Adam Duvall in 22, who wasn't good anyway. You probably don't have Sean Murphy in 23. Now, the question is, does William Contreras get better defensively? Or do you end up just having a negative back there in William Contreras? That sounds harsh, but listen. In 2022, William Contreras' fielding run value on StatCast was -9. It was 4th percentile in all of baseball. He was -8 catching runs. He was negative in framing. He was negative in throwing. He was negative in blocking. And that's only with 519 innings behind the plate. He didn't play a lot behind the plate. And he was still bad. And again, the trade is what made him be better. When he got to Milwaukee the very next season, he had 943 innings behind the plate, and he was worth +10 catching runs. He went from -8 to +10 in 1 year. He was above average he was better than average at blocking. He was much better at framing. And he improved closer to 0 on throwing. He got better at everything immediately. He doesn't do that in Atlanta. He said it was because of the trade is what made him be better. What made him realize he had to get better. So Atlanta's whole pitching thing that's built around these ridiculous breaking balls, right? The Charlie Morton curveball, the Chris Sale slider, all of that stuff. Does that stuff happen with William Contreras behind the plate? I don't think it does. You probably have to keep Travis d'Arnaud. He hasn't looked like the same player in a couple seasons. But with William Contreras behind the plate, I don't know if these pitchers are as effective. Hurston Waldrop looked as good as he did last year because Sean Murphy, in a rehab stint in Gwinnett, said, hey, start throwing a sinker. And Sean Murphy caught him all of his starts until Sean Murphy got hurt last year. And the first start that Hurston Waldrop had to Drake Baldwin, he didn't look as good as when he was throwing to Sean Murphy. So, do you get much better offensive outcomes from shortstop and from catcher? But is that offset by your pitching being worse? Does Contreras naturally get better as a catcher defensively without the catalyst of the trade and an organization that he was in love with giving up on him? I don't know. But at the end of the day, it feels like if you had to redo those 2 free agencies, even if you don't know now, if you don't know then what you know now, there we go. It still feels like Dansby's the one that, in retrospect, you needed to bring him back. And I don't think the 177 for 7 years was the right way to do it. But could you have come up from the 140 and maybe done 6 for 150? Gotten a little bit closer to where he wanted to be. If you do that and you bring him back, it's possible the 2023 season ends better than we thought it would. And it's possible that the outlook for 2024, you maybe make the postseason a little bit earlier, assuming your catchers are as good as they were. We don't know that with the different catcher behind the plate. And what happens in 2025? I don't know. But I also know this offseason, you're not still trying to find a shortstop. You got a shortstop. You're not paying $20 million to Ha-Sung Kim. Where else could that money have been used? We'll never know. This has been Braves Today. Do me a favor, if you're listening on audio and you like this little bit of a different type of show, leave me a 5-star review. Some kind words would be great. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you know when we go live, we drop the next episode, and all that kind of stuff. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.